Hey, it's 10:30. Good morning, everyone. Happy Lunar New Year. From now on, I'll be the moderator for international seminar. And today, our presenter is Ms. Haeju Kim, and she will be presenting multi-scalar interactions between mismanaged plastic waste and urban flooding in an era of climate change and rapid urbanization. So, Ms. Haeju, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellie. Hi, everyone. My name is Haeju. I'm an international cooperation team manager in OSEAN. So first, today I'll review this paper as Alicia just introduced. So first, I'll review the background of the paper, then briefly outline its theoretical framework. Next, I'll summarize the main findings and discussions. And finally, I'll examine the conclusion and key takeaways. This paper was published in December 2023 in Wiley Interdisciplinary Reviews Water, and it examines the interactions between mismanaged plastic waste, hereafter I'll call it MPW, and urban flooding, and two environmental challenges that are often studied separately. To better understand these interactions, the authors adopt a social ecological systems called SES approach, which considers urban flooding and MPW not as isolated problems, but as part of a larger interconnected system involving various factors such as social, environmental, and governance factors. This paper concludes that SES analysis reveals new context-specific intervention opportunities, making it a useful tool for policymakers, urban planners, and environmental organizations like us. Before diving into the main findings of the paper, here's a brief background of this paper explaining why this issue is critical and urgent. These pictures are not from the paper. I just thought it would be better to present with visuals rather than only text. So I randomly searched on Google Photos of the flood that occurred last year. Flood problems are becoming increasingly severe as we feel as well, regardless of whether they occur in the southern or northern or in eastern or western regions. And the average annual economic damage caused by urban floods exceeds $104 billion. And if it includes indirect losses such as impacts on human health and welfare, the figure is countless. And according to climate change predictions that expect a 1.5-degree rise in global temperature, with studies suggesting that we already exceeded in 2024, the economic damage is expected to increase by 160% to 240%, and number of human deaths by 70% to 83%. At the same time, plastic waste pollution continues to grow at an alarming rate. We know that every year, million tons of plastic waste enter the ocean from land-based sources, and it is expected to increase significantly as solid waste production is projected to triple in some regions by 2050. These stated stats highlight that the scale of the issue and emphasize the need to examine how urban flooding and MPW interact with each other in complex and dynamic ways. To better understand the relationship between mismanaged plastic waste and urban flooding, the authors use a framework known as the Social Ecological Systems SES approach. This framework is useful because it allows us to examine human and environmental systems as interconnected, rather than treating them as separated. So traditional studies often focus on either the technical aspects of waste management and flood control or the social factors influencing plastic consumption and disposal behaviors. However, this SES research moves beyond this binary thinking. Instead of viewing social and ecological systems as independent, SES emphasized that these systems function as an integrated, dynamic network of processes and relationships. To illustrate this, I have included an SES diagram from a study on sustainable savanna management. So the examples written in small texts are about savanna management, so it's not directly related to MPW and urban flooding. But anyways, it helps visualize the key points. That is, systems are complex and interconnected, where human activities and natural environments interact through continuous feedback loops. The same logic applies to urban flooding and MPW. Both are shaped by various factors such as policies, infrastructure, environmental processes, and human behavior. Given this complexity, using the SES model provides a more comprehensive way to study their interactions. Now, the first aspect we will see is that between the MPW and urban flooding, the first aspect we will see is that significant role of mismanaged plastic waste in worsening urban flooding. Across the world, there is strong evidence linking plastic waste accumulation to drainage system failures and increased flood risks. The problem is particularly severe in rapidly urbanizing areas where formal waste management infrastructure is not sufficient. According to this paper, there are two primary ways that mismanaged plastic waste contribute to urban flooding. First, plastic waste accumulates in canals and waterways, reducing water flow capacity and increasing the likelihood of flooding. Second, plastic waste block storm drains and other hydraulic infrastructure which causing localized flooding and waterlogging. There is an example from Indonesia, which you can see from the picture, where field experiments show that trash racks in river blocked by plastic waste cause upstream water levels to rise 5 times faster than those blocked by organic waste. This is because plastic is denser and more compact, leaving fewer gaps for water to pass through. There are also other direct and indirect impacts of MPW during floods, such as solid waste and other debris carried in floodwater cause damage to property and endanger human lives. And blocked drain create areas of standing water, which contribute to the spread of water and mosquito-borne disease such as dengue and malaria. Actually, I just knew that it's a huge problem in Africa in this way. And then also, I haven't thought about it. Yeah, so this is mosquito-borne disease can happen higher when the blocked drain. And also plastic and other solid waste in standing water encourages leaching of chemicals into groundwater and over decreases in water quality. Also, while MPW contributes to flooding, the reverse is also true, meaning urban floods significantly worsen plastic waste management by transporting large amounts of debris into water bodies. Flooding leads to a process called plastic leakage, where waste that was originally contained in landfills or urban areas is displaced by floodwaters and carried into rivers and oceans like this. And there is growing recognition that flooding plays an underestimated role in global plastic waste transport. Many traditional studies on plastic pollution focus on annual or monthly estimates of waste accumulation. However, these studies often fail to explain the impact of flood events, which can lead to sudden surges in plastic waste entering water systems. At the same time, the mismanaged plastic waste also increases coastal flooding vulnerability. One example is mangrove forests, which play a crucial role in reducing storm surges and coastal flooding. However, they are particularly vulnerable to plastic waste accumulation. A recent issue of our APML Marine Litter News featured this study on effects of marine litter on mangrove regions of West Bengal, India. And the photo on the left side was directly taken from the article. If you look closely at the photo, you will notice that the mangrove tree is trapped in plastic bags. When plastic gets trapped in their aerial root systems, it can block nutrient flow, weaken tree structures, and ultimately kill the mangroves. This, in turn, reduces the coastal protection they provide, increasing flood risks over time. Similarly, coral reefs, which act as natural breakwaters, are already under stress from rising sea temperatures and climate-induced disease outbreaks. The presence of plastic waste further exacerbates these threats, contributing to reef degradation and reducing their effectiveness in mitigating coastal storm impacts. In both cases of mangrove and coral, we can understand the mismanaged plastic waste ultimately increases vulnerability to flooding in coastal communities. At the broader level, the interaction between MPW and urban floods are fundamentally linked to climate change. Plastic production and disposal contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, which drive extreme weather events, including heavy rainfall and flooding. In 2015, plastic production accounted for more than 3% of global emission, releasing over 1 billion metric tons of CO2, which is a large amount. And the number is getting higher and higher since we use and produce more and more plastics. In addition, plastics in the environment can worsen climate impacts in unexpected ways. For example, microplastics in Arctic ice can change its albedo or reflectivity, causing the ice to absorb more heat and accelerate melting. Similarly, plastics in the water column can negatively affect the health of phytoplankton, reducing their ability to absorb CO2 and regulate global temperatures. When these various impacts over the life cycle of plastic are combined, the effect on the climate becomes significant enough to be quantified. So these examples illustrate that plastic waste is not just a pollution issue, but it's deeply intertwined with climate dynamics. The interactions between mismanaged plastic waste and urban flooding appear differently across the world. While there are significant variations even within countries, there are some general trends when comparing the global south and north. In the global south, the relationship between MPW and flooding tends to be local and severe, primarily due to insufficient waste management infrastructure and limited flood prevention systems. Informal urban expansion further intensifies these risks as new settlements often emerge in flood-prone areas with inadequate drainage. The combination of high population growth, weak waste collection systems, and a lack of proper flood management infrastructure make MPW-driven flooding a persistent issue in Global South. Meanwhile, in the global north, better waste management systems generally reduce the direct impact of MPW on floods. However, this does not mean the region doesn't have any problem. Flood risks are increasing due to climate change, as extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and changing land use patterns amplify flood vulnerability of global north. Another critical issue is plastic waste exports from high-income to low-income countries. Per capita plastic waste generation is significantly higher in high-income nations, yet much of this waste is shipped to developing countries for processing, where some of it ends up as mismanaged plastic waste, which worsening local flooding risk in global south. This raises concerns about environmental justice, as the people least responsible for plastic waste pollution often bear the greatest burden of its consequences. Given these disparities, one-size-fits-all approach is not effective. Instead, solutions must be context-specific, considering regional, socio-economic conditions and governance structures. Addressing these kind of challenges require a multi-scalar SES approach to determine the most effective intervention points in both flood prevention and waste management systems. And this, you can see the diagram which the authors made. This diagram summarizes the complex relationship we just explored, showing the interconnected nature of mismanaged plastic waste, urban flooding, rapid urbanization, and climate change. The key takeaway is that technical or social solutions alone are insufficient to address these complex systems. And this paper emphasized that MPW and urban flooding share overlapping causes, impacts, and locations. And changes in one system create ripple effects in others. So practically, this suggests that improving waste management system can have directly benefit for flood mitigation efforts and vice versa. So a major insight from this SES approach is the systematic thinking uncovers new intervention opportunities. So viewing these issues separately misses potential synergetic solutions, whereas analyzing them together helps identify policy and infrastructure strategies that address both challenges simultaneously. Ultimately, systemic change is essential, requiring integration across urban planning, waste management, disaster response, and governance. Also, different regions demand tailored interventions. The Global South may prioritize waste collection improvements, while the Global North focuses on adapting flood management to climate risks. A one-size-fits-all approach won't work, and solutions must be context-specific. This is the kind of summary for this slide. To summarize, this paper highlights that MPW and urban flooding are not separate environmental issues. They are deeply connected through complex social, ecological, and infrastructural feedback loops. The SES approach is particularly useful in visualizing these relationships and identifying intervention opportunities that would otherwise be overlooked. By considering multi-scale interactions, this model emphasized that effective management of MPW and urban flooding requires engagement from all relevant actors. While this paper is a review study rather than an original research paper, it compiled and synthesized existing studies on MPW flooding interactions. And as far as I know, in this ocean seminar, we haven't covered this topic at least recently, so I thought it would be valuable to bring it into today. So looking ahead, these issues will only become more pressing in the era of climate crisis and increasing plastic production. So therefore, through this seminar, maybe we can reflect on the 4 key aspects we just saw here and consider how we, in our respective roles, can contribute to effective interventions in the system. And one point I noticed while reading this paper is that despite this severity of the issue, research in this field is still relatively underdeveloped. So I have compiled a list of research gaps mentioned in the paper, which may be useful for those interested in further study. It include MPW, urban flooding interactions across global to local scales, how MPW behaves in drainage systems, impact of flooding on remobilizing plastic waste, long-term effects of plastic waste on mangroves, coral reefs, and wetlands. Also, socioeconomic and environmental justice aspects, and developing measurable indicators to guide practical interventions for waste management and flood risk reduction. And lastly, how plastic waste affects climate change. So these are pretty much underdeveloped, which needs further study and research. And lastly, before we finish, I want to briefly introduce some examples that illustrate the impacts of mismanaged plastic waste and urban flooding, not just in developing countries, but also in high-income countries like South Korea. So in South Korea, a major urban flood in Gangnam, Seoul in 2022 caused extensive damage and even loss of life. And discarded cigarette butts and trash in the street drains were one of the causes of the problem. A particularly striking moment occurred when a guy photographed clearing out a storm drain with his bare hands here in this picture to help removing these cigarette butts and small trashes, and to help addressing the flood issue. So this image went viral on social media, earning him the nickname Gangnam Superman. And in response, there are many people now know that we should not discard trash in the street drains. And in Seoul, some launched this Block Drains Cause Floods campaign, placing awareness sticker near drainage system. However, despite these efforts, improper waste disposal, especially cigarette butts and small plastic items, remain a common problem in Seoul, at least in Seoul. And I see it often when I walk down the street. Also, similar issues have been reported globally. For example, in Bangladesh, floods have been exacerbated by plastic bags clogging drainage systems, leading the government to introduce a nationwide ban of plastic bags. Also, in Africa, 35 countries out of 54 countries have implemented strict regulations on plastic bags, recognizing their role in exacerbating urban flooding and causing severe environmental harm. And plastic waste is proving to be a growing concern. For example, during the recent wildfires in LA, firefighters reported that widespread use of plastic-based household materials such as carpets and furniture like sofa contributed to fire's rapid spread and made firefighting efforts more difficult. These incidents highlight how plastic and plastic waste is becoming an increasingly complex and multifaceted environmental challenge. Maybe at this point, I can open the floor for discussion, and you can share any insights, thoughts, or questions that came up during the presentation. Also, if you have any example from your country, whether policy measures, community initiative, or case studies similar to those discussed, you can share. Thank you.